We've got that the right way around, so
Yeah,
three more one side.
Yeah.
127.
Okay, fantastic.
Brilliant. Just check the fellow judges.
We will be asked. Thank you.
Very kind. Thank you. That's fine. Whenever you guys are ready, don't rush.
You best believe
Are the teams ready? Are the judges ready? May I start the time?
Please do.
Hello. thank you so much for coming today. I'm Zach. I'm the General Counsel of Auto Legacy Limited, and I'm joined by my client, John Smith. And just to preface this negotiation, we really do appreciate you being open to this meeting. And I know we've had a number in the past, and I look forward to hopefully coming to an agreement this time. But with that being said, I might pass over to John to just outline our overall position.
Thank you for meeting. We're very excited to discuss the future of both our prospective companies. In terms of the background of Auto Legacy Limited, we're known for essentially our global operations. So we have many chains throughout India, and our manufacturing capacity is spread globally. And we have a wide distributor network, and as well as this has helped us diversify that network to different consumer bases as well. And generally the trend that we see is that our consumer base is quite loyal. So that helps us meet a lot of our outcomes. In terms of why we're here today, we come to this negotiation with the interest of ideally an acquisition. We would love to partner with you, and we recognize that you are market leaders in developing sustainable transportation. Something of interest for us is definitely the impact you can make with environmental outcomes. That's something we're really looking at. CSG as well, that's something that we would really love to collaborate as well. In terms of the timeline, we are looking to move a bit quicker. So our timeline would be roughly 2 months in terms of staging, but I will hand over to Zach just to discuss any issues.
Thanks for that, John. And look, we really are excited to be here. I think there's a lot of good and excitement that comes in the future of both companies and some collaboration, which we can hopefully reach. And before I do move to just outlining key issues for us today, I did just want to take this opportunity to clarify my role in this negotiation as General Counsel. So as counsel, I do act primarily as in an advisory capacity throughout the negotiation. John has full and unqualified authority to agree to any outcome in this negotiation today. And I'll also assist, of course, in acting to protect John's interests and the contents of this negotiation, as the case may be. I would move now just to discuss the issues which really stand out for Auto Legacy and are quite key to us in this negotiation. So to put it simply,
introduce yourself.
Oh, please.
All right. I'm Juan Rao. I'm the CEO of EV Innovators, and we're very happy to meet with you guys today. I think this is an exciting opportunity for us to scale and get the reach that we want on the international platform, while possibly integrating the culture that we have, the innovative culture we have at our firm with yours, and to bring this to the global stage.
Right. So I'm Yuri. I'm the General Counsel for EVI. And so before that, as you mentioned, I think briefly that you were trying to say, going to highlight certain things that may be material to the negotiation. So maybe quickly, I could also point out a simple list of things that I would like to discuss, see if it aligns with you. So I think firstly, what my client is very interested in is specifically the deal structure. I mean, obviously, right? You mentioned, I think earlier, John, about an acquisition. So obviously that's something we're open to, but we also are considering alternative deal structures. Specifically, we are looking to the possibility of a joint venture, as I'm sure you're aware. Secondly, something we should talk about also is the existing supplier relationships we have. So as you know, at EV, it's a complex beast, right? There are many different parts within it, and each one of our parts are sourced from different suppliers. And within that, there's also certain issues that may get tied up, including change of control provisions within these supplier contracts, as well as the IP ownerships to these specific parts of the EV. So that's something that's very material for us as well. We also wish to discuss a little bit about governance and employee incentivization. So I believe this would fall under basically the control that we would have in any sort of partnership moving forward beyond today, as well as any way in which we can incentivize certain key members of our staff, including our CMO and CTO, who have been very integral to our company's success. Lastly, our 2 points that we need to deal with is a potential not ongoing rather, but the threat of litigation, which I'm sure you're aware of. That's something that we can table for the later part of the discussion once we've confirmed the broad strokes of how we want the agreement to be. And lastly, we want to secure certain exit rights for ourselves in the event that we were to move forward with a sort of joint venture arrangement. Yeah.
So I think the main thing is that be it an acquisition or a joint venture, what we're looking for is long-term collaboration. Even if it is to be a joint venture, what we are looking is a long-term joint venture. So when we speak about exit rights, it does not only mean exiting the joint venture and leaving this collaboration completely. It could also be the other way around, such as changing in shareholding structures in the long term. So we would welcome discussions on long-term collaboration.
No, thank you. I think you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of the issues for us as well. We have identified quite similar issues. I did state broadly that we had 4. So the first, aligning with your first issue, is that deal structure. So of course, there's our preference for an acquisition, but depending on how this negotiation goes, we're more than amenable to discussing a potential joint venture, just outlining the terms of that deal. The supply contracts as well is the second issue for us, which we would like to flesh out. I think we agree with what you've said in respect of that, so I'm happy to just note through that rather quickly. The third one for us, this was your 4th point in liability, I believe you phrased it as.
Yes.
For us, in a way, we are seeking indemnities, just perhaps in respect of any legal issues which may arise. And in respect of the product recall from a few years ago, we appreciate the mitigation risk that you've no doubt taken in the years since that occurred. But we do just want to be quite clear in our position in ensuring that going forward that we are sound with respect to any potential deal that we enter into.
Yep.
Our 4th point was governance. So while you mentioned that our employer incentives, for us in terms of what government looks like, it's quite important for us to ensure some control or some level of decision making in respect of the business. Of course, this would look different as to whether it's a joint venture or an acquisition, but I think we can address those later as they come. And in respect of exit rights, we're happy to address those as well as you've raised. John, was there anything that we wanted to add to that?
No, I'm happy with that. Are you happy with that structure?
Yeah, I think we're quite amenable with that. Could I just suggest that, for the sake of convenience, whenever we discuss the structure, we could probably talk about governance, because I feel like those two are probably quite intimately linked. Yeah, so I think it's very difficult to discuss structure without talking about governance and past experience. So if you want, we're happy to either start with the structure and the governance, or we can start with the sort of easier to deal with points like supply.
I think actually, I think what we have here is really great that we have come up with a great set of heads of agreement. But perhaps what we could also work towards is to actually highlight what we each want to prioritize in this deal, so that perhaps we could, if we understand the end goal, then we can work towards that goal. Whereas these are so-called means to achieve those ends.
Yes.
So if I may ask, what are your long-term plans with EV? What we are aware of currently is that there has been an effort to make a push into the EV market by Auto Legacy. However, there has been some stalling, and that there is pressure to essentially play catch up with the industry. So we were wondering, if we were to go through with any transaction today, what would that look like?
Of course, I'm happy to address that question. So in respect of why we would like some sort of collaboration between our companies, this primarily goes towards us meeting environmental and social governance, and as well corporate social responsibility outcomes. This is something which would help expand Auto Legacy, and as well as this really alleviate those reputational outcomes, and something which we view quite highly. We have made an effort in the past to do this, which it was unsuccessful. So this is something which is of key interest coming into why EV innovators today.
Of course, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know in the past we've discussed that it's now 2025, right? As we trend and people grow up, the younger consumers now really are demonstrating a preference for that environmental responsibility. And while I believe that Auto Legacy is still quite strong in those over 40. Those under 40 are demonstrating a preference for electric vehicles and more sustainable options. So it really would be ideal for us to be able to break into that market and appeal to a larger and a wider demographic, while in turn scaling and assisting with your business growth.
I think we agree with that. Those are, we appreciate, and I think our priorities are aligned there. But to me, that doesn't really justify why an acquisition is required as opposed to a joint venture. So I guess we'd really like to understand what it is that is driving towards an acquisition as opposed to a joint venture. Yeah.
So I suppose in terms of this, we would like to integrate the advanced EV technology into our own systems and to further accelerate that technology into more sustainable vehicles on Auto Legacy's part. As you do appreciate, we are a wide distributor network across the globe. So I suppose implementing those technologies, not just in India, but across the world, would be helpful to achieve those outcomes.
Perhaps to put this into, I suppose, a bit more legalese, which you might appreciate. It's important for us that if we did proceed with an acquisition rather than a joint venture, that it would enable us a greater degree of control in really assessing and driving where the products are going and ensuring that we really have a streamlined focus and ultimately final say in how we can structure EV products going forward to us. Whereas if there is a joint venture, which of course we are open to, then there would be more discussion in how those key decision-making responsibilities will be allocated.
Right. So just to clarify what you're saying here, sounds like when you want to acquire us, it's not just about opening new revenue verticals. What you're interested in is also basically harnessing our technology. So there will be essentially a question of whether the intellectual property will flow as well across, and obviously in the form of an acquisition, you would have the full proprietary rights to our intellectual property. So I see where you're coming from that perspective. So what I wanted to say is sort of, you have to understand that we are at the moment still an expanding startup. And it's perhaps not entirely a startup, but we are still at a stage where we feel like we haven't maximized our value yet. And so that's why we're sort of not so keen on acquisition, because we feel like we're losing out on a lot of value if we sell our entire stake now. Whereas we believe that if in a joint venture, we can continue to grow and reach a stage where we're more comfortable of realizing the true value that we believe that EPI holds. And that's why we're full disclosure leaning more towards a JV. And that's why also I think if we were to sell right now, it would come at sort of a premium on what your valuation of us is, taking into account the sort of potential growth that has been untapped thus far.
And I think barring the transactional structure here, essentially the core of our business is actually innovation. It's literally in our name. And so as you can see, we've recently established a state-of-the-art research lab facility, which is actually driving these innovative solutions to EV dynamics, right? And so our concern with regards to an acquisition where your client has essentially excessive control over this creative direction or marketing direction or operational directions, our concern is that the key of our business would essentially be treated as a research facility for your company, whereas these are actually visions of key personnel in our company that we do want to see come to fruition to a certain extent on our terms as well. And for example, in the case of a JV, what we would be open to doing is to sort of have a board of governance, for example, in order for our key personnel to oversee the operational decisions that are being made.
And of course, you would have a seat on the board. Yeah. Oh, distribution of the seats. Yeah.
No, thank you for sharing that. It's really helpful to understand the rationale behind that. I suppose this somewhat goes to the timing and structure of it, but as I think I mentioned in my opening, we were looking at a timeline of 2 months in terms of thing. Do you have a timeline in mind?
Why is your timeline 2 months?
In terms of why, this is because we will be, we basically want to take a step and be proactive in our environmental responsibility that we're taking. So as we've mentioned before, EV Innovator stands out in the market in that sense. You have developed a sustainable vehicle, which has not just gone well, but has been quite successful.
What kind of pressure are you under in terms of pushing through an ESG initiative? Because I think that's been going on in this industry for a really long time. So we just don't really understand why it's compressing the timeline to 2 months.
Because 2 months obviously is much shorter than say a year, which gives us more time.
Due diligence alone would take,
Yeah.
a month essentially.
No, of course. And just to clarify, it's not pressure that is the be all and end all and would curtail any agreement which we could reach. But if I could just perhaps clarify John's point, and feel free to jump in if I'm missing anything. But as you know, we as a key manufacturer and a business make annual climate related disclosures. And this year we have noticed a focus that because we have been slow and we acknowledge that we have been slow to break into the EV market, that there is more of a call to arms for us to do that. So the reason for that 2 months timing, and of course an agreement doesn't necessarily need to be fleshed out with detail that, but we would like to in 2 months when we have to make those disclosures to show that we have a clear path.
Like a commitment.
An agreement.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, just correct me if I'm wrong here, but would an announcement of a potential collaboration would that suffice? Because as you know, the moment a news hits the market about such a potential collaboration, I think the markets will naturally react positively, especially if it's something that you're concerned with. So is it possible for us therefore to say not so much a 2 months timeline, perhaps a 2 months to have sort of a somewhat of a progress towards a working solution, just so that you can get your ESG commitments in line or announce to the world basically that you are working on something tangible?
That's definitely something
Yeah.
that would be open to. The interest behind this is making sure that the market itself knows that we are being proactive in those steps.
Of course.
And I think just to clarify that if it was an announcement, of course, we wouldn't need to flesh out direct deals, but perhaps providing some metrics or some sort of roadmap at the very least, which would indicate that it's not simply just a statement that we're making.
Yeah, and would your team be the one in charge of the social media market?
Or would you prefer to leave it to our CMO? Because we know that you've been struggling sort of on that front with regards to social media.
That would be something we're open to. In terms of, we'd be more open to that, especially given that we have a strong social media following. And
But perhaps putting it another way, and even in, I suppose this would align more with going towards a joint venture that we could work collaboratively. And because your business is so apt in environmental sustainability and goals, that it could be something that our client could then learn from and continue to develop, which would then in turn assist a potential collaborative joint venture if we reach.
I think this is a very apt moment to say that perhaps if we can't right now, we are I think a bit reluctant to both commit on either whether it's a JV or a full acquisition because we haven't fleshed out the material terms yet.
Yeah.
So perhaps we could look at some of the material terms before circling back to this at the end, once we sort of have an idea of where we're giving up on exactly. So I think supplier contracts, is that something that you're okay to get discussion on?
yeah, well, I'm happy. Just before I begin, I suppose with the supply contract, as you're aware, we have an exclusive supply contract with Dynavac.
Yes.
You did mention before that we had a change of control.
Change of control.
Yes, provision. Would you mind speaking to that a bit more?
Sure. Perhaps I can speak on this since it's a legal matter. So what this means is basically anytime there is some sort of change of control of who controls, in our case EEI, this clause will be triggered, and they essentially have the option to terminate their agreement with us unless they give us some sort of consent beforehand that they are okay with control changing over. So, most obviously, if it was a full-scale acquisition, this control provision will kick in. And we have reason to believe that even under a JV scheme, this is likely to play a material part as well, because in some way you will have control over our operational decisions if you were to move into a joint venture and Dynavac will supply the batteries to this joint venture. So that's something I want to basically let you be aware of.
However, I'd just like to add that in regard to operational decisions, regarding the use of the batteries in the cars that are produced under the JV. If we do have more influence on that specifically, seeing as that's predominantly licensed to us to use in the first place, I think they would be more agreeable to not trigger the change of control clauses. And it would be easier for us to bring that to them instead.
Could I just ask if Dynavax has expressed why they rely so heavily on these change of control clauses? Are there any specific reasons for it? Or?
I think it's just standard sort of M&A precaution in case, let's say, we are being bought over by a company that's hostile to them, and that we may currently, sever the relationship or take advantage of the existing relationship to their detriment. So I think that's why there's a sort of change of control provision there. So it's nothing specific to say like we're not, at risk or anything. It's just a standard practice for them.
Yeah. And let me just put it into context what our relationship with Dynavax is. I think there's been a slight misunderstanding that I'd like to clarify here. And that's Dynavax is our exclusive supplier. So in addition to the change of control clause, they are our exclusive supplier. And when we negotiated that with them back in the day, that was to our advantage because it meant that our competitors did not have access to that, right? But what we are saying is that if we do have better operational control as to how those batteries are used in the products that are produced under the JV, right? Then in this case, we may be agreeable to loosen this exclusive supply contract, which would allow them to license the use of the batteries to the JV as well.
Alternatively, it could be sub-licensed from us to the JV or sub-licensed from us.
Essentially, we could loosen the exclusive agreement if we had essentially more board influence, the board of governance influence with regards to potential G.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes, with the supplier, the reason why I asked those questions is because Auto Legacy has considered that arrangement quite efficient, and it's something that we would like to explore, the relationship between both the parties and Dynavax moving forward. Could we just seek a clear assurance that if there was to be a joint venture, I know you've outlined the change of control clause, would Dynavax still be the supplier post-acquisition? But do you have a
Yeah, I mean, we can't definitively say that they wouldn't want to invoke their change of control provisions because we'd be speaking on behalf of them.
Yes.
But to my knowledge, and based on my understanding of the legal context of this provision, there's nothing to say that they would necessarily trigger it, especially if we explain to them sort of good faith that we are entering into this arrangement with. And I think they're more than happy to essentially potentially get another customer for their batteries.
Yeah, as we mentioned, the exclusive agreement was actually to our advantage.
Yeah.
And now if we all, share success in this joint venture, then we don't see a reason why they would vehemently object to it and be hostile about it. But did you have any other concerns with regards to our supplier relationship?
Yeah, just while we're on the Dynavax point, has been made clear to me that this is a rather important point for my client. And even if we are to enter into a joint venture, we would view maintaining that supply relationship with Dynavax, whether that's with its exclusivity provisions in force as they are now or otherwise, as it's in a way a non-negotiable for us. At the very least, we'd like to treat it perhaps as a condition precedent.
Okay, I think what we could do is this, right? I think what we could do is we could sub-license with obviously with their consent, we would have to bring this back to them, but we could sub-license the use of Dynavax batteries to the products under the JV, and that way you retain a relationship with Dynavax. However, we would need to secure basically an anti-sub-licensing clause with you guys, so that you're not sub-licensing that product to another company or with another JV. And would that be agreeable to you guys?
Would you be open for that potentially over time being phased out to go beyond the JV to Auto Legacy, so that if we later down the line develop our own electric vehicles, that perhaps those batteries would be something that we could use pending the success of the joint venture, if that's what we enter into?
I think what we're considering here, or what we're cautious about, obviously, is to protect our own domestic market.
Yes.
So that's something we're considering. So I'm not sure if we explore this idea of potentially geo-locking the use of the Dynavax product. And also specifically, of course, it would depend on the relationship with Dynavax, whether Dynavax wishes to license it to you as well. But I think what we're more concerned about is that we don't want to lose market share in our Indian market, which is our home market, and we have extensive connections with the government. So we're very protective of that home market. But of course, we understand that you are here to help us take us to the international market. Yeah.
So we are also aware that, given that this is a long-term collaboration, we don't want to, we would not want to be in a position whereby our products are in competition with yours, which are, independently produced, but also using Dynavax batteries, seeing as that is our unique selling point. So we would request for that time frame of the exclusivity provisions being phased out at a pretty long time scale. So maybe 8 to 10 years, for example, seeing as that is the typical product cycle of a vehicle model. But apart from that, is there any other concerns you have with our supplier relationship?
I think where I look at is the uninterrupted supply. So ensuring that Dynavax is able to meet the capacity, given that we'll be scaling up to a global market as well. Just pretty much ensuring that everything is in order on Dynavax's end.
So are you saying that, asking us if there's any issues with Dynavax at all?
Yes, if you have.
Yeah, pretty much we've not been given any information to that effect. Also, something I just wish to clarify. So you said you're interested in Dynavax core, but are you aware that the core is not the only part of the product? So essentially, what gives us that special edge in the EV market is not just the core, but also what we have patented.
Yes,
if I'm wrong, which is the sort of shell that wraps around the lithium-ion battery, to put it very crudely.
So essentially, Dynavax produces the lithium-ion module. So if you were to dismantle an electric car, you would see little boxes of lithium ions in there. But we actually own the patents for things like the casing and other components around that to basically apply the energy that's stored in the lithium-ion modules to a vehicle. And so that is also why we would like to retain a pretty influential role in the board of governance on the JV, seeing as that is also the key thing to what we contribute to this transaction. It's not just the product of Dynavax. Obviously, they are a wonderful product. They've done us a really good deal over the years. But that said, we also bring value to that as well.
Yeah.
Look, I think pending, of course, any deal with respect to the joint venture, I think that could be something which we would be accepting of. However, we would seek the very least an exclusive license in respect of that technology for the joint venture. And if you're receiving, I suppose, increased board rights with respect to the joint venture, then we view that as something which would be
right. Sorry, could you just repeat that again? The exclusive license to the JV, that's what you're saying, for this particular technology?
Yes, for the technology for use by the JV.
Wait, so can I clarify, does this mean, are we still allowed to use this technology for sale of our own products outside of the JV? So essentially what that means is when we sell cars in the Indian market, obviously we're going to need to use this technology. So we have free rein to continue using that, right? We're not assigning that license to the JV. It's just that we wouldn't be able to license it out to another party, for example, for the duration of the JV exists. Is that something we could do?
That would be something. The reason for that license is, again, that interest of integrating technologies into our own. So if that is achieved, that is primarily our interest in that respect.
And I know you mentioned that 8 to 10 year timeline at which we could look at then broadening that license and allowing it to extend over our potential product line with respect to electric vehicles.
Subject to a geo.
Yeah, for that time, that is something we could still discuss. And I think we will be accepting of a geo-lock with respect to India. That seems to be your...
I think that's it. It's by market. Is there anything else that you choose?
So, yeah, essentially, we also have other suppliers with whom we do have very close relationships. For example, Bharat is an OEM and a supplier of our drivetrains. And I think what I'd really like to do is to reassure you that the potential issues we may face with our suppliers are fixable, and it is incredibly likely that we would avoid any conflict with them.
I think
that end, oh, sorry, please.
So I think what my client is referring to is our understanding that Bharat Autotech is essentially a big supplier to one of the main competitors, Maruti, I believe.
Yeah.
And what my client is trying to reassure you is that it is basically market norms for these OEM suppliers to basically supply components to competitors, simply because of the nature of how the market works. And so we want to reassure you that this wouldn't be basically a blocking point for the deal to go ahead.
For example, could give a few examples. Really, Boyson makes exhaust pipes and cooling pipes in China for Mercedes, Audi, and BMW. Bosch supplies cooling parts and gaskets for all sorts of different cars. If you're maintaining a Toyota from a Toyota to a BMW, it's all going to be Bosch. Brembo Brakes as well supplies brakes to other people, but essentially, commercially, it's just components in a car that companies don't find it efficient to fully invest their R&D in, unless you're really like Ferrari that really wants to design their own brakes or airflow systems, for example. So we don't think this would be a major issue moving forward. It's market norms for this to occur.
Just on that point, I suppose, can I ask if with respect to any of your suppliers, if you've faced issues relating to that in the past?
No. So I think with that being said, I think we've more or less wrapped up on the smart point. I think we're quite happy with that.
Yeah, I'm happy to move forward to.
I believe it's the government. I think you want to talk about.
Yes, we're happy
or
to
control. Yeah, governance.
Governance and control. Yes. We're happy for you to start
Take the lead on this. Okay, yeah, sure. So, like we mentioned earlier, and then I think we've discussed as part of this that we would like to basically take the lead on the JV, essentially in terms of basically how the JV works, 50-50 ownership, so profits likewise split 50-50, just about who controls it. We would like to sort of have a controlling stake, as mentioned earlier, because of our earlier agreements. And just would like to point out that one of the reasons we need a larger stake as well is because we need to give one of our board seats over to a VC, which currently has a minority stake in us, and they've requested, because as part of the change of control provision, if we want them to greenlight the deal, they are requesting that they have a board seat on any sort of arrangement moving forward, which in this case, if we're talking about JV, would be a board seat.
That's not to say that they will be drastically changing our commercial decisions. That's not what they want, actually, because the VC would not want to actually meddle in how we design our cars and all that. Put bluntly, what they want are returns, right? And returns are what we jointly want anyway.
Yeah.
So we don't think there'd be any conflicts of interest with having our VC there, seeing as what they want is aligned with what we want. And that would be amenable to that.
Can I just clarify that VC, that's Horizon Delta?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Is there any particular aspect of the JV that you would like to seek exclusive monopoly or control over? Or that you're particularly concerned about that you want to have control?
In respect of this, we did consider introducing a new CEO into this joint venture. I'll just outline some expertise. So his name is David Clark, and he's the current divisional CEO of the global passenger vehicles unit. So he does have significant expertise in this area, and he's overseen multiple product launches themselves. And the reason why we're considering this is just to maintain strategic and financial oversight. We do trust David's credentials, and in this respect, we find that he would be quite in good stead to lead the joint venture.
And I would also like to add on as well in respect of that, we would also like to appoint a CFO who similarly, she's the Vice President of Corporate Finance within Auto Legacy, and she's very well known in managing complex integrations like what this joint venture could ultimately become. So if we are moving to or accepting of Horizon Delta partners obtaining a board seat, then we, in return, would like those appointment rights with respect to a senior executive and perhaps 50% of the joint venture board seats.
So you would be expecting 50% of the board seats that would get 50. Oh, over the right.
So in terms of board seats, we would ideally like to have a majority. That being said, we welcome the appointment of the CFO of your choosing. But with regards to the CEO, could we return to our respective boards and perhaps both come up with an ideal candidate and then compare it at the next meeting? Is that amenable?
Primarily what we're concerned about is basically the compatibility with our own key players, right? Because who we need to keep on board are Alex Gray, our CMO, who has been essentially influential to our market campaign, as well as Dr. Mehta, who is our chief engineer and director, and she leads basically all the EV research. She leads a very talented team of engineers. And what we're particularly concerned with, that comes with this sort of merger and acquisition, is essentially a potential culture clash. Because what Dr. Mehta especially is very concerned about is keeping a sort of innovative culture. She wants to, of course, be at the forefront of EV development, and she doesn't want to be somewhere where, growth is stagnating and that, they're shifting away from innovating and developing new technologies to simply churning revenue numbers. So that's something we're particularly concerned about. And that's why I think my client says he wants to take this back to the board before we can give you an official confirmation that we're okay with proceeding with your respective nominees. In the alternative, however, if you were to give us a majority control over the board, I think we'd be much more comfortable with just proceeding with your appointments, since we have the sort of comfort of knowing that in the event of any sort of clash or basically the CTO, we can call Dr. Mehta the CTO, I suppose, of the JP as well as the CEO. We would have sort of a more control over how that gets resolved, essentially.
I think we have to draw this out to the bigger commercial picture that we are in currently. It's that there has been an attempt on your side to, enter the EV market, right? And there has been delays there. And so that is the value that we bring to you to drive this innovation and to drive this entry into the market, which is why on the surface, it seems more intuitive to me for one of ours to drive it. But we are also conscious that in a JV arrangement, there needs to be mutual appreciation and mutual learning. And so we appreciate the fact that I think we would welcome the fact that you could appoint your CEO and but we retain the board majority so that we could steer the company that JV in the right way.
And apologies, I think correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe a bit tired, but I did make a note here that we agreed previously with regard to the suppliers that if we would give an exclusive license of the use of the battery technology to the JV, it would be reflected in the form of an increased board representation on the JV. So could I clarify if that's still a clause that we're looking at?
Just to step back, you mentioned majority control.
Yeah.
That's just the board. I suppose just to take a step back, the reason why we are proposing CEO and board seats generally 50% is because there are some concerns, at least internally, in terms of the expertise of some of the directors. You mentioned Dr. Mehta. Yeah. There are some reservations from our end in terms of her continuing as a director, more so for experience. We would like someone who is putting good stand, has led a few times, and has that commercial awareness in order to create successful.
Yeah, so when you mean put concerns about her, so are you saying that you want to remove her from the JP or that you don't want her running the JP?
In this respect, it would be to remove her from the JP.
And what are the nature of the concerns? So if you could just elaborate on that, because we're not aware of that.
It's more so experience. So we have some reservations in terms of her experience within these day-to-day operations. So it's an operational experience instead. But if you have more information regarding her experience.
No, if I might clarify, we do understand her experience, but it's our view that that experience is best suited in the day-to-day operations, which she currently does in respect of EV innovations. But in managing and overseeing a complex joint venture like this potentially would be, in our view, she's not the right fit.
Right. So I think there's two things here to highlight. Firstly, I think we're a bit confused for why you want to remove Dr. Mehta, because her skills lie in primarily her role as chief engineer and director of engineers. So she's sort of the head or the brains behind our EV push. So a bit confused if we remove Dr. Mehta, isn't it kind of removing the value add we have to this JV as well, since she's in charge of the EV engineers? But to that end, I think we understand what you're coming from in terms of you want a more experienced CEO or CFO. And I think we're really only comfortable going forward with that sort of arrangement to exclude Dr. Mehta, who's been integral to our success. And you can understand how that may potentially ruffle some feathers within our internal structure. And the only way we'll be able to move forward with that is if we obtain a board majority over the JV, if we want to sideline her and completely from the JV.
But my apologies. I think to some extent, perhaps the lack of sleep has gotten to all of us.
Right.
We do recognise the value that Dr. Mehta brings, and it wouldn't be necessarily an exclusion from the JV, but at the very least, she wouldn't be running the JV. And I do note what you've raised in respect of you being accepting of perhaps senior executive appointments if you retain a board majority. But I think the concern that we have with that is that if you did have a board majority, well, then even if you do accept our appointments, well, then there's nothing to stop you down the line than just kicking them off and moving someone else in.
Okay, so it seems to me the issue here is that there is a fear that this would be a one-time arrangement. That now that we're talking about it, you guys can appoint, and then we get a majority, and then tomorrow we can be like, hey, now we have the majority. We'll turn around and remove it back. I think what we could do is have some tenure provisions here in terms of the tenure during which your appointed CEO would sit there, and that with the board majority, my board could be agreeable to cede appointment of CEO rights to Auto Legacy with regards to this, because we understand again about that mutual learning and appreciation nature of and JV arrangement, and that's something that we want this deal to emulate.
Right, and also I think because we're just ultimately concerned that if Dr. Mehta doesn't have a role in the JV, the JV gradually would lose value over time, because again, we want to emphasize that one of our strong points is bringing EV research and the sort of technology.
And I think and I think if the concern is Dr. Mehta's ability to run day-to-day activities, I mean, we've all met individuals who are very adept in their individual skills, but they might not be so adept in management, and we do recognize that as managers ourselves. But what could I propose that we have Dr. Mehta in as sort of a CTO in the JV, such that we retain her expertise, continue to give her that platform to deliver the value that she brings to our transaction, such that she does not interfere with the management of a full-scale operation as a CEO would.
So leadership would basically be limited to the engineers that she's currently helping,
which is exactly what she's adept to do.
Yeah.
That's something to be open to. I suppose just to reframe it, our concern here is just maintaining strategic and financial oversight. So that's something in terms of Dr. Mehta, we understand that she is integral to your side of the joint venture, but in respect of ours, we would like to reconcile that. I know that you mentioned with the board 75% at this point, that wouldn't be something that's viable in terms of board.
I don't think we
Sorry.
mentioned less than 75%.
Majority.
Yeah.
But I'll revert to council.
Yeah, look, I think if there is a majority stake being sought with your, I think was it your VC having a seat as well, that we see what we bring to this joint venture really is that expansion of scalability on a global scale, and we are contributing a lot in that regard. So we see that in order for us to best make available our network and our manufacturing capabilities, which are known for their reliability, that perhaps at the very least at this stage, it could be an equal 50-50 split, at least in respect of the board However, we get those appointments that we want. Dr. Mena stays on as CTO, and in respect of the exclusivity, that perhaps we could reach some royalty agreement instead, so that you could obtain some ongoing cash flow and capital as a substitute.
I think firstly with regards to the board majority, I think what we can consider is basically if you have 50-50 amongst both of us, but then the VC supports you. So if there's 11 seats on the board, you get 5, we get 5, one goes to the VC. Yeah, that could be the structure of how the board would look like. Then we would scrap the tenure arrangement because that was something we were offering to reassure you that if we had the majority, we wouldn't take away your key position. So we'll do away with the tenure provisions. We'll keep the idea of you guys having the appointments of the CEO and CFO. We'll appoint, perhaps we can put Alex in as well since he's our CMO. We will appoint the CMO and CTO, right? Which is Alex and Dr. Mehta respectively. And then with regards to you mentioning the exclusive license, perhaps for now, we wouldn't consider an exclusive license, but you're mentioning something, sorry, I think about the royalty fee?
Yes, instead of then an increased stake in the joint venture, we could offer royalty payments in respect of that exclusive license.
But would that be able, would the commitment to bringing us to an international stage that scale still be present as part of the JV?
Yes, that's
Yes.
what
Okay.
So it would be present on the basis that all our manufacturing networks are spread across.
Right, so
So-
we would be able to draw that as part of
Yes.
the JV. And then so instead of giving you an exclusive license, which would give you trade it down for a royalty. Yeah.
I think that's agreeable.
Yeah, I think that's
But we would have to again bring it back to the board.
But I think this is very promising.
I think this is promising.
Okay, so we've tidied up that on the essentially the governance in case of the JV. Yes, who would sit on the board and the sort of key appointment holders that you listed down. So I believe next up, we'd like to talk about the liabilities.
Yeah.
Correct, with regards to the board.
I think we'd really like to engage with this as well, and be fully transparent with you. There has been a voluntary recall with regards to Volt Racer, as I'm sure you are aware. We did everything we could to swiftly resolve this, as in, send in notifications. People came in to get their cars sorted by implementing a firmware update and a hardware replacement program. There have been no legal claims filed to date, and which is why we don't see this as a high risk to this transaction, seeing as what the recalls that we have issued have been addressed. So there is no outstanding issue with regards to the litigation risks.
And I think as President Council, I should get ahead on this and also mention that we're very keen to basically have so much control over the conduct of any future dispute or related settlement because we feel like we are responsible for it. So we would like to basically take the lead on any sort of potential legal claims, none of which have materialized yet on this particular matter.
Because it has nothing to do with this transaction, because this recall occurred much prior to this transaction.
Exactly.
I think just from our order legacies point, thank you for disclosing that. We're just a bit concerned about potential for ongoing liabilities moving forward.
Right.
I was talking to my counsel about this, if I'm wrong, but would something like the indemnity work?
Yeah, at least in respect of potential issues arising out of the Volt Racer recall specifically.
Right. If you're looking at indemnity, I think we would like for it to be capped because I think an uncapped indemnity is extremely dangerous in this sort of transaction. What we could do also is to basically give you the full information about what the recall was like and basically the components that was faulty as part of the due diligence process, so you can research into that as well. But if there were to be any indemnity being discussed, I think we would like for that to be capped at a certain amount. Is there an amount that you're particularly looking at to secure for the indemnity?
Would you be happy for it to be capped at around 8 million?
Is there a reason for 8 million?
Just to ensure that these recall claims, they can go quite high depending on the issues and the actual effectiveness stuff in respect of them. So we feel that to ensure that we do have, I suppose, full coverage to some extent in respect of any potential issues that will come up.
But honestly, we're looking at a much lower figure with regards to indemnity. Our client, I think, mentioned, our board highlighted that around 2 million is the figure that we're looking at with regards to indemnity cap. If we were to go any higher, I think there will be sort of sunset provisions on this particular indemnity. We would not like the indemnity to stretch on forever. Perhaps after a period of a few years, maybe 2 or 3 years, the sort of indemnity would have to lapse because we don't want to essentially continually be bound on this particular matter, till the end of time. Yeah.
I suppose to that regard, then, if we were to drop the cap down to 5 million for perhaps then a term of 8 to 10 years, the same as potentially to evaluate those exclusivity and license terms with Dynavax, and then reevaluate at that stage and reassess as to whether there are still perhaps potential issues which may arise in respect of the bulk racer.
I think while I understand the sentiment there that you want to protect your client's interest in regards to defending against risks of litigation, but I think 8 to 10 years is a little bit excessive, given the product cycle of cars, essentially. In 8 to 10 years, the issues that were already highlighted 3 years ago, would have already lapsed for more than 10 years, essentially. And so we don't think that I don't think the board would be amenable to exposing us to this indemnity for that protracted period of time. So if you could reduce the time frame to, let's say, 5 to 6 years, seeing as it is a voluntary recall, we did not receive any regulatory complaint. And after we issued the voluntary recall, it is, after all, the choice of the consumer to come and get it fixed.
Yeah.
However, again, like counsel said, we can pass you all information on the issue during our due diligence.
So to summarize, would you be willing to take like 5 million indemnity cap for, let's say, 5 years? We can give you warranties as well that we have acted accordingly properly on this particular matter, and that there are no ongoing legal claims today.
If we did agree to that, would you be happy for us to reevaluate that indemnity at the end of that 5-year period and see if there have been any issues which may arise, and if so, that we could potentially extend that liability and reassess at that date?
Sorry, I just want to clarify. What do you mean by reassess? So if there had been an issue, then wouldn't the indemnity clause trigger, and then we would pay out the 5 million?
Yes, but we would like it in that regard then to be continuing. We see that if there is an issue that arises, let's say in 3 years, which would then be 6 years after the voluntary recall was effective.
I think
Protection.
I think what our board would most likely agree to is actually we would be agreeable to be bound to speak about this and to engage you to activate a review, essentially. But I don't think we'd be agreeable to be bound to extend the indemnity if there has been any issues, again, given that the product cycle has already passed by.
And particularly since you are also aware of this and you've given warranties on this and you have the due diligence on this particular issue. And so it's a no-liability sense, even though there have been no active litigation on it. So that's why we're quite hesitant on basically extending it.
I understand that. In respect of this, the concern is just throughout the period of the transaction, we want to mitigate as much risk as possible. So that's why my counsel has suggested that 8 to 10 years. Can I just ask, is there a reason why the duration could be a bit smaller? Is that just perhaps you can think about that?
It's just extraneous risk that is unnecessary exposure for us. But if really 8 to 10 years is the sticker, we're willing to agree to that if the indemnity cap is reduced to perhaps 2 or 3 million.
Or in the alternative, if there's no, I think the extension thing is something that I'm quite hostile to, pretty much.
In that case, would we maintain the cap of $5 million? And in terms of the actual length or duration of it, keep it for, say, 7 years, and then have an option to reassess that last year?
We're fine to extend it to 7 years without the extension.
Okay.
So basically a simple boilerplate indemnity for $5 million for 7 years.
Yeah.
Yes, but without an option to extend.
Without
the option to
extend.
Is that something that you agree with?
I think in that respect, I prefer anyone to extend it, just in light of anything happens. It is quite a new market.
In that case, could it be, let's say, 3 million for 5 years with an option to extend?
We are quite stuck in 5 million. That would be.
I think in this case, it's pretty difficult for us both to
Yeah.
come to an agreement. It's probably the biggest factor involved. But just setting out our position, I think it's quite unlikely that we would accept any sort of offer with the idea of an extension. So we prefer it to be clean, a certain sum that lapses after a certain period of time. That's the most we're willing to indemnify you on what essentially we still believe is more or less a non-issue. Right?
And I think in the interest of time, could we, for the sake of completeness, speak about certain exit rights with regards to, for example, certain lever provisions for auto legacy, and preferably on our end, we would like for bad lever provisions to be included, and we hope that it would include violation of the licensing agreements that we have, seeing as we're licensing fee, exactly, and the royalty fee that we agreed with, and possibly an infringement of IP. We don't want to see a situation whereby you see, Landwind in China producing a look-alike that's like a Land Rover Evoque and being able to sell it for 5 years.
Look, I think that's something that we could be open to if, in respect, we could seek the same from you.
Yeah, I think that's very fair.
Yeah.
Is that it? Yeah, I think we can basically in the last 3 minutes run through a summary of what we've agreed today. Right. So I think what we've concluded is that we would move forward with JV structure. In terms of the supply contracts, we've determined that after review that there's not much material issues with regards to our current suppliers. We've reassured you that our current suppliers, even though there are change of control provisions, that they're more than likely to proceed on this particular matter. Is that okay?
Yes, and just to clarify that,
Yeah.
that would be adding us onto that exclusive, just supply contract that you've mentioned as well.
With respect to the James and potentially in
yes.
the future, I believe it was.
Yes. Which we agreed to be geolocked.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
Lots of things going on around it.
Yes.
Yeah. And then it wouldn't be a exclusive license of the technology of the Dynavax battery to the JV. Instead, we agreed on some form of royalty fees of the lithium-ion battery, so on, I think, because of the fact that we want to have a majority here on board.
Sorry. To clarify, we would have the exclusive license, but we'd offer royalties in exchange for.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right, that's fine. Okay. And then with regards to the governance of the board, governance of the JV, I believe we agreed that the board seats will basically split 50-50 between us. How that may be reflected +1 essentially for the VC, who represents the minority stake on us. You will get appointment rights over the CEO, CFO, and we will get appointment rights over the CMO and CTO, right, to be filled respectively with our own key appointment holders. No sort of tenure provision, given that none of us actually hold the majority of the board.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And then
All right, the indemnity. So we've agreed, basically our position on this is quite clear that we want a capped indemnity that has no option to extend, but you would prefer something with an opportunity to extend. Yeah, and so we agree that we'll both take this back to our board and see whether we can come to a better agreement in the future on the indemnity point. Exit rights, yes, as like I mentioned. So exit rights for both parties, which reflects
Which essentially bad lever provisions for both sides, which would include violation of the licensing agreements.
Yeah.
And an infringement of IP.
Yeah.
And then just to clarify, I think there was the minor thing earlier with respect to our what was it? Our climate-related disclosures.
Yes.
Right. So basically an announcement that we will be starting a collaboration with, which can be run by our CFO.
I think that would be a great start to this fruitful collaboration, and as well as solves our problems and just raises will come together.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now I I request the judges to choose either team for the question answer round, and I request the other team to wait outside, please.
Well, given that I'll get the numbers wrong, 127 went first. Why don't we let you guys go and have a break, and we'll ask 1 through each questions first.
I believe in the question Q&A.
So thank you very much indeed. If I can start with just an open question. What were your 2 primary objectives when you started this? And how do you think you fared against those 2 primary objectives?
I think that we outlined at the start that what we wanted was the ability to scale and to reach an international audience. While we did not disclose this openly to them, we also wanted to do that without giving up this sort of control over the creative direction, as well as the agreements that we have with Dynavax, seeing as that is our unique selling point, which is why we were very reluctant for them to be able to enter an agreement, a separate agreement with Dynavax to use their batteries in Auto Legacy's own cars. So I think we were pretty stern about the JV arrangement, and we managed to push through that. And it was only through the JV arrangement, as opposed to a full acquisition, that we are able to stay true to our initial goals of, scaling and reaching an international audience,
while also not compromising on essentially the IP and technology to form unique selling point.
Right. I've got one follow-up question for, I'm sure there'll be more, but where do you think you ended up with the IP arrangements and the license and the exclusivity?
Right. I think our understanding was that in the end, what would happen would be that we would still have the right, obviously, to manufacture our own cars with the technology that we had. What would happen would be, in a sense, we would sort of license our battery product to the JV, which would then be able to use it to produce cars and sell cars on the international stage. However, we wouldn't be licensing our technology to other companies to enter into similar arrangements with them. And in a sense, that was sort of the exclusivity provision that they were talking about. And then in the end, we also mentioned something about changing it to a royalty instead of having expanded exclusive license for them to use the product, which was basically what they caved out in exchange for not giving us a board seat. Not giving us a majority on the JV board eventually.
And how much were you going to get paid for those royalties?
I mean, that's something that we didn't discuss as part of the negotiation, but from what we understood, it was not so much the royalties that were important to us, but keeping the right to use that sort of technology. The financing from them came on in the form of capital investment, the ability for us to leverage on their capital goods, essentially to produce cars on an international stage, to sell our cars on through their distributor networks to their client channels as part of the JV arrangement. That was sort of the expansion overseas part.
Okay.
Yeah.
But since this was the most important point for you, like you wanted to reach the global market.
Yeah.
But what was your understanding with them on using their network? Because this is a JV.
Yeah. So I
think not give access to their marketing channel.
Yeah, no, but I think when we discussed with them, they seemed very open, and they mentioned that I asked them, so would this compromise on our ability to use your infrastructure to sell our vehicles overseas? And they were like, yeah, this is part of the deal. So I think that was something that we were both in agreement about how this JV will be moving forward. We'd be using their infrastructure to scale overseas. But I think that's why we focus more on, since we're both on agreement that we want to take this international, we focus more on how the control of this particular venture will work. Since it wouldn't make much sense for us to both pat each other on the back and say, oh, well done, thanks for taking us overseas, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to tap into the EV space.
I think something to note as well is that pretty early on, we realized that they would be in more of a rush than we, because they had that timeline to reach in order to declare that they're committed to ESG. And we were also under instruction to basically not feel rushed to enter into an agreement, seeing as we do have our own plant in Germany already, and we are already essentially a market-leading product because of our relationship with Dynavax. which is why we were not so concerned about those points raised earlier, but rather to preserve the spirit of innovation in our company.
So you talked extensively about exit rights, right?
Yes.
You ended up with a JV which was 50-50, right? And equal board, like majority board rights, right? So how would you see a deadlock situation then?
I think it would, the reason we put 50-50 and then the VC would be the plus one, right? Yeah. So the VC would be the tiebreaker, and we would be pretty confident that the VC would back us in the deadlock, seeing as they are also minority shareholders in our company.
I mean, ultimately, a VC is interested in revenue and profits and in growing the company. And we think that more or less that is also in alignment with what the JV is about anyway. So if the VC is likely to vote along similar interests as us, basically, not so much the idea that because they invest in us that they will always support us, or more likely the fact that our interests are likely to quite align with us, and so we believe that they're more likely to vote alongside us in terms of a deadlock.
Your understanding is the board seats are 50 plus.
Yes, so it would be like, let's say if there's 11 seats, 5 for them, 5 for us, plus 1 VC.
Okay. Do you think that is their understanding as well?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be really quite clear. With this,
Verbatim, we said 5, and then plus 1.
And then okay.
So I think you did a fantastic negotiation, but tell me, you both were so, you were so worried about your interest, right? How do you see the success of this JV? Because there is nothing in the JV that will make it successful, right? Because you are holding the technology, they are holding, and the people are, there's, what do you think will make the JV successful?
I think
What's the win-win strategy you think for the JV?
I think the goal of the JV is ultimately market reach. What we wanted to do is to actually retain flexibility, which is why I spoke about exit rights. What we want to do is, I think as council mentioned earlier, we are not a startup per se, but we are a company in a rather earlier stage of its development, which is why our utmost priority was not to really make it big through this JV, but rather retain certain things like our relationship with our suppliers and the incentive programs in India to continue to make us successful on a foundational level, which allows us to be flexible.
Right. So that's so much of like why the JV works for us. And I think why the JV works for them ultimately is because they essentially they're struggling in the EV market, right? They haven't got anything going. What we're giving them is essentially the opportunity to say, hey, we actually have an EV line now, which is in the form of the JV. And so now they already have exposure in the form of, they actually have a physical product on the ground that they can sell. And so they can run along and tell their investors as well, hey, we have committed to the ESG commitments that we promised. Here is our EV line. We've done it in collaboration with a market-leading EV company. I think they're going to be very bound for that, at least in the short run, because of the board pressures that we mentioned that they're facing, that they need to sort of start producing their, I think, Green Future program. I think that was something that they were working on, but it's sort of hit a halt. And so I think that sort of mutual interest is what's going to keep the JV going, at least in the short run.
Thank you.
So I had a question about your employees and the structure. You seem to suggest that the way you envisage the JV is that you're going to have a business outside the JV.
Yep.
You're going to license some part, only the battery business and certain IP to the JV. But then your CTO, you're appointing key people at your company to the JV. So you'll be losing that talent outside the JV. So how do you see that sort of playing out and impacting your business in the future?
I think full disclosure, we kind of expected our CTO and CMO to be running both roles. I think perhaps it was maybe a bit ambitious to ask them to both run the JV and run the local business. But I suppose what we can do in that sense is basically hope that with regards to the CTO at least, the engineers that she has in place at the local company, what her job was there was primarily to just lead and set direction, which I think she can continue to do so in a more limited capacity. The brains behind it, like the technology, ultimately still lie with engineers, which we didn't commit to shifting entirely to JV. And as with regard to the CMO, I think likewise, similar principle where you can continue to set high-level direction for the rest of the team to execute. It's not like it's a one-man show in either case whereby, we're without him at the local business, media strategy and engineering strategy is just going to collapse.
Thanks for sharing that. And just last question for me. Is there any point that you came into the strategy with this, that, something you were willing to concede or that you wanted to hold on to, and then you changed depending on how you sort of read the room and the other team?
I think one of the non-negotiables for us was the access to essentially our supplier relationships and the IP related to that. So originally we were not prepared to actually
Sublicense
the Dynavax exclusive agreement to them. But after seeing the way that we basically wanted to drive this collaborative approach to ensure that we actually do get something out of the JV, because if we don't sublicense it to them and they have no access to our unique selling point, then essentially what they are coming to us for won't be in the car that is produced by the JV, thus losing the JV's unique selling point, which is detrimental to us as well.
I think something is also this was actually quite conciliatory compared to, other times when we've done negotiations. So I think that actually spurred a sort of a shift. And I think the fact that they were actually willing to go along with the JV structure, even though we didn't explicitly insist, okay, JV, we said we're still open, but notice as the negotiation went along, they sort of went along the JV structure. And I think part of that is also about give and take. If the fact they're so willing to accommodate us on the JV structure, felt that this was something that we could accede to them as well. Yeah.
So how do you plan your funding? With JV, so you have to bring in the money, right?
Yeah, I suppose
you are not so strong financially. So
yeah, in the 50-50, it's probably, my guess is in the bulk of the cost, in the sense that the JV will incur is the production of cars, which they seem really willing to do in terms of the production of it. And then what we would fund is probably, I think, essentially the salary or the putting our key talent into sort of helping make the JV work, in terms of integrating the battery to the new car that's being produced. So that's
subcontract the manufacturing to Autoliv.
That's something that we did not manage to discuss with them. However, we don't see. We think that this would be it would be appropriate to include it in the next meeting with them.
Maybe not the manufacturing, but sort of the design. Yes, manufacturing seems to be more special.
Yeah, because we have sufficient information to suggest that we have manufacturing capabilities, given that we have received an investment to build a plant essentially in Germany, which, if I'm not wrong, is also a market that they are active in. So if this were to be tabled in for discussion at the next meeting, I think this would be a point of agreement.
What do you think would happen? Because you're having a lovely conversation, you've got the JV done, you guys are going to bring the IP, they're going to contribute capital and their manufacturing experience. What if 6 months in they turn off the money and turn off the manufacturing? Where are you guys left?
I think we could have been more alert to ensuring the funding sources of this JV. However, because there was no valuation being offered from them, we did not have firm numbers to perhaps provide a quantum of contribution that each party needs to bring forward, which I think was why that part of the conversation did not arise, unfortunately.
I think looking at the brief itself, it didn't seem like they wanted us to focus on that aspect that much, actually, because the numbers, I suspect, were really excluded in a way. So I feel like they didn't want us to get sucked down into the numbers discussion of it, which is why I suppose we didn't focus that much. But I suppose we could have baked in more under the exit rights or perhaps ability to sue on breach of eventual JV contract.
The kind of things that you can ask for are commitments over periods of time, so that you can achieve joint production targets year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and so on, and those kind of things. So you can talk sometimes, this is counsel of perfection, right? But you've got to think, if the other side is bringing something, you've got to commit them to bring it, because otherwise they can be really devious and have locked you into an international exclusivity and then just hold you at zero while they go do something else, someone else. Right. I've got one other question. Perhaps the last one subject to anybody else's. So I think you two have got a really good dynamic, right? And you exchange answers and things between each other very well. I think that helps you. I notice your general counsel stabs you with a pen. Just try and rein you in,
among other things.
you know, I think we've all seen those kind of things. So I'll invite you to confer between each other for a minute, but I'd like you to give us what do you think was your best moment of interaction, and what was your worst moment of interaction where one of you wished, oh, I can't believe he's just said that.
In this round or
In this round?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Okay. I think the best moment was so often in negotiations that this occurred in this round, but it's very applicable to other rounds as well. I'm personally a very opportunistic negotiator, as in I may do all the prep that I need to do, but I might see a gap in what our opponents are saying or a commercial opportunity. And so sometimes I really see an opportunity that counts on it. And in this negotiation, what I can think of is the way we push them to differentiate what they could get from an acquisition compared to a JV. And I think that does take a lot of trust, because that was not fully anticipated, but it was a line of questioning that deviated from our original agenda, but it was still necessary to find out their business objectives. So what usually happens is that, I give him a look and he knows that I'm about to take a risk, and then he sits back and supports me afterwards. And I think the best thing about that is just that we don't quarrel about it during the round, as in I trust him to take risks, he trusts me to take risks. We speak about it after the round, but it's full support during the round within reason, of course. He might come back later to adjust what I spoke essentially. But I think that relationship is something that is very well treasured.
I think in terms of the worst moments, generally I can't think of a specific moment, but I can think of general situations that are familiar. I think situations where basically there's a misunderstanding on how we want to proceed on a particular point. I think this happens because sometimes you speak in isolation because you want to pursue a certain course of action, and then of course you can't just stop in the middle of negotiation and say, hey, is this actually what we want to do? I think those moments are really difficult as well, because you don't want to cut off your friend's train of thought and jump in and correct him in front of the other party, right? Because the other party will like, what's going on here? And so I think those moments are probably the worst moments in that sense, where then you realize that actually your friend may have committed to something that you didn't really agree with, or that committed to something that wouldn't really work out based on the commercial realities of what's there. Yeah.
Maybe a CEO moment was that, right? You developed that argument over a period of time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing further from me. Well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. I'm just going to start by asking you, what were you came into the room, what were your two primary objectives And how do you think you fared against those two objectives?
I suppose, from the position of a client, I was looking also at goal of governance. That was the governance, the environmental rollout. That was something that was viewed quite highly in regards to the facts. So achieving that and then integrating it was something that I looked at. And the other thing would be governance. So having the strategic direction within.
I think to an extent it is different perhaps from the council's perspective. I think that the key thing for us was some sort of agreement, whether that is a full acquisition of EVI or a joint venture. And in respect of that, while we did agree to a joint venture, we identified that ideally the best position in respect of that would have been a joint venture with exclusivity over their proprietary technology, and that wasn't fleshed out. So while we did get a joint venture, it wasn't ideal for our client.
So do you feel at the end of that you sort of got what you wanted, or what if you didn't, what are the bits that you didn't quite get?
I suppose I'll break it down in parts. So in terms of governance, for example, we got the CEO role and the right to appointment of that and the CFO. However, something that we could have leveraged more going forward. So we note that it was 5 seats from Auto Legacy, 5 from EV, and then the 1 from Horizon Interact, and that could have been something that could be viewed as unfavourable given that it's not a majority seat, if it's 11. And something we did get, which was helpful, was the exclusive licensing technology, so we can integrate it. That was a key interest that we noted for Auto Legacy. And in respect of the timing, getting that assurance that there would be an announcement, albeit before any deal was closed, was helpful in regards to preserving a strong reputational standpoint.
Yes, I think it wasn't feasible that we would have, within 2 months, finalised a deal, but at least working with the other side to provide that announcement is something that does avoid the issues with the climate-related disclosure. Something, though, that I think we really should have done in respect of the agreement that we were going towards, and that joint venture would have been to propose a convertible joint venture so that down the line it would ultimately end up in an acquisition, and that would more mutually align with both of our objectives. And I think had we actually outlined that earlier, then we could have achieved ultimately a more favourable outcome for us.
What do you think, you guys, your highlight of that was? When you could compare amongst each other?
Okay. I think that the highlight, at least for me, was the supplier discussion. That went a lot smoother than I anticipated it going. Because when I probed into what those contract provisions were, they were quite candid. It made achieving that exclusive, being part of that exclusive client arrangement a lot easier. And if not, we do recognise that Dynamax is a third party, so we can't agree, but the assurance that they would go back and check was something that was key influence for clients.
Yeah, I think I take a more holistic view as to the highlight. I think the highlight was the relationship to an extent. I think it was quite easygoing back and forth, and at times on our part at least there was certainly too much give and not enough take, and we could have been more assertive, but I think going into it with the intention to actually reach some sort of outcome which is to some extent mutually beneficial to both of us is something which is always a highlight.
Thank you.
So, in terms of what you negotiated, like, what do you think is the success factors for the JV? Because you got what you wanted, you think, right? You got an announcement, right? And but what do you think that is there for the JV?
I think the most successful thing in terms of the JV itself would be, I suppose it's twofold. So we're quite happy with the exclusive license that was used in control, but also I think the appointment of the CEO really get to strategic alignment in terms of, from Auto Legacy's point of view of having influence, that is quite helpful. And so that's probably what I consider as one of the best parts of the joint venture agreement.
Yes, I think one of the key points with respect to that was maintaining that supply relationship. Ideally, if we couldn't get that exclusivity direct from Dynavax, which was quite clear that it wasn't going to happen, or a sub-license at this point in time, at least with respect to the JV, that we did have access to that proprietary technology was important for us. And while we would have liked to be able to, ideally at this stage, broaden that to potential EVs that will develop our company itself, I think being able to at least table it for some point down the line was to some extent effective.
But you landed up in a situation where EV is going to sell their own products. They're going to learn from you and sell the whole products in different markets, which they don't have the capability now. And then they're also going to make parallel products in the JV, right? And at the end of it, you lose your leverage. So how could you have protected that?
I suppose then this kind of looks like a good idea for you for the convertible loan, where the joint venture convertible JV could turn into a strategic acquisition. So then we could maintain, I suppose, ownership of those technologies and really limit it to having a competitive edge in the market.
Because ideally, I think the leverage that we had, which we didn't actually use, was that, I mean, when they went to expand into Europe, they had their voluntary recall because their product wasn't working. And our clients known for key manufacturing, it's reliable, vehicles are reliable. And I think that that was something which we could have really leveraged to gain more favourable terms for us in assisting them in actually successfully breaking out into a new market.
So basically, exclusivity for the product, differentiating the markets they can sell and you can sell.
Yes, that is something that we should have done. I know they geo-locked their exclusivity in India because that's primarily where their market is. For us, we didn't see that as too big an issue because our market is not just limited to India. It's a much broader, much bigger market. So we see that the JV is not itself just limited to India. It does extend overseas.
So what made you concede to a 50-50 joint venture with majority of the board given to them? And plus they have their VC voting, right? So what do you think, what was going on there?
I suppose we prioritize the CEO and CFO over the board in that sense, in that interest of strategic alignment. Perhaps in hindsight, it should have been the other way around, but yeah, but that was where it came in. So at least in terms of leading the company, that's what a lot of our focus went on. But yeah, in hindsight, maybe it should have been more focused on like the stakeholders and directors themselves.
I think to some extent we were very much shoehorned in the fact that there was that 2-month time pressure. I think we imposed that rather strictly on ourselves, and we could have taken a much more liberal approach to that. And in doing so, that made us, I suppose, more amenable to just accepting offers without properly really considering the commercial viability of them, because we were trying to, I suppose, cover ourselves in respect of that one issue, which in the grand scheme of things is tremendously all that important.
So also, you knew these guys were financially good and you were financially strong. How do you think they will fund you?
In terms of funding, we did it more for access technology, so that was what was higher, but we should have leveraged the commercial, the financial disparity a bit more to achieve other things. Yeah, one thing that we did value quite highly was that integration of the technology itself.
But I think there very much was, because EVI, they had that research division as well, that because we do have access to a lot of capital and a lot of funds, that we could have used that. Yes, and to leverage with respect to their research and contribute to that. And then when we fund that and they develop further technologies that because of some of our funding that we then have a stake in that, and that's further technology that we can incorporate into our products, which is not what we did.
Thank you.
I had a slightly more sort of fundamental question. It was at the start of the negotiation, when you were thinking of the JV structure, what do you think that each of the parties was contributing to that JV, particularly in the Indian market?
I suppose to break it down, I sort of interpreted order legacy having more of an operational standpoint. So that being the control of the manufacturing overseas, and then EV having more of that idea, which essentially starts the joint venture and is the reason for it, that being that they're integrating their products into it. So I suppose if there was a split, that's how I perceived it.
Yes, they're really simplifying it. They're contributing innovation. We're contributing scalability. They have their key products and their proprietary technology, which is going into the JV. We have that global outreach and access to the market. So there was that contribution going into it, but ultimately, I think on our part, it wasn't dealt with as well as it should have been.
Thank you. And then I'm curious, was there at any point in the negotiation an opportunity you saw in what they were conceding and what they were saying that you took that was a better position than your starting negotiated?
It wasn't so much a concession. Yeah. I think there were a few of the intellectual property discussion where they did offer us that exclusive license, and that was quite helpful in achieving our goal of just making sure we can integrate that.
Oh, I think because we didn't bring up acquisition directly or the convertible JV, that something that did put us in a better position was at least down the line, because they made it clear that they were looking for a long-term joint venture, was that we could phase out that exclusivity in respect of the Dynamax batteries and actually then bring it into our broader EV portfolio. And because we didn't get that direct acquisition, if we are developing our own electric vehicles, then that will take 5 years, we know on our facts. So at that point, there's only a few years left before we can, I suppose, gain access to those batteries.
Turning to the Volt Racer recall and the indemnity, where do you think you ended up on that?
I think in terms of the final agreement, it was that there would be an indemnity, but it was just the duration which was uncertain. So that was where I think we ended up. I took the position that it should extend for the whole agreement to just mitigate risk, which is where we hit the sticky point. So then the agreement was then returned to that in another negotiation.
I mean, we actually didn't end up anywhere at all. They're taking it back to their board to see where they can go. We're taking it back to see where what we can do with it. And I think that there very much were concessions that I do think both of us could have made in respect of that point. I think we could have dropped that, dropped down to 5 million sooner, but we really should have emphasised the fact that if it really wasn't a material issue in their view, well, then they should have no objection to just simply agreeing to it. But
yeah, so I would say you got further than that, right? Because you got to the idea that there would be an indemnity. You had a discussion over a time limit, and you had a discussion over a cap. So those were the broad strokes of what it was going to be. You started at 8 in your ask. You, I think, sort of came to 5-ish, and then there was some debate over the quantum impacting the time frame. And I think in terms of time frame, you were, as I was reading how it was going, you were somewhere between 5 years and 8 years, I think, with the idea of a kind of review or extension. So I think you're doing yourselves down in your earlier description. That's how far I saw you get. if you were to go back and report to your board on the back of the brief that you got, would you be saying that with a smile or a sad face? What's your sense?
Definitely more of a cautious, take care expression. It's something that could take a while to confirm, especially given those time frames and things like that, and the time pressure which Autolex is on to essentially make the reputation impact as well.
Yes, I agree. Probably more cautious, but in respect of that framing, there is clear steps that we have taken. So it's not necessarily negative thing.
Yeah. And you might say structurally, you've sort of left yourself in a better place because with a JV rather than an acquisition, it's not. I was wondering whether that was in your mind, whether you sort of left it behind outside of your bit that you control.
I think we know that we did have that preference for the full acquisition, but it became quite clear very early on that that wasn't really something which they would have been as interested in. And because we did have that ability to also enter into a JV, we felt that at that point it would have been in our best interest to progress it in that regard. And I do think that we got further with respect to the JV than we would have had we really pressed and stayed on that acquisition course.
I was going to ask one last question. Unless
Sure, I have one as well.
Yeah, so my last question is, what question haven't we asked that you wished we had asked you? Which is really to say, what answer do you want to give now? Right?
I suppose my end would be like how we assess interest and where to proceed, things like that. In terms of our planning beforehand, we pretty much acknowledged that the BATNA would be that essentially Auto Legacy would just continue operations. And the bottom line was that it was in quite a good market state, and the criticism it was getting was an environmental standpoint. It wasn't a pressure, but there was no regulatory concern, like legal or otherwise, which would have affected that negatively. And then the WATA would be that the climate later disclosure would mean that there's long-term brand road to implement that.
Yeah, I do think if you did ask us about BATNA and other opportunities that we really should have addressed during the negotiation, it is that at one point it was put by their client that I suppose in a way that we need them because they're in that EV market. They are well known, but we also potentially have access to, I think it was the third largest Chinese electric vehicle company as well, which we could have entered into as well. So that's something which we should have considered more strongly in respect of that.
I think Mark, I was more from 2 or 3 points. Like one, if you are really in a 50-50 and you don't have a board majority, you necessarily negotiate reserve rights. They were again and again kind of coming on to exit rights, right? Because it was in their interest to, like you gave away the majority board rights, and that was something I just thought it should have been discussed with them because that's very natural. But overall, my question was in terms of if you have to now in a hindsight push for a acquisition, what would you really be pushing for? How would you have convinced them? I found you did not push them enough. So therefore I'm inquisitive. What could have been those reasons?
I feel as if the acquisition, it would essentially boil down to financial leverage. We would be a large company, they need funding to expand globally. It was acknowledged that we were established in India, but to expand that market, especially when environmental sustainability is so popular, that's something that we could have leveraged to our advantage in the sense that if we had acquired them and it wasn't just a joint venture, they could have leveraged perhaps our other resources, our manufacturing branches overseas as well.
Yeah, I think I would add on to that and say that there are two more points. Just coming directly off that, it is those manufacturing capabilities that we have, because we are known to deliver high quality, reliable products. That's something which we really could have pushed for, particularly in light of their recall, where they have put out a product that ultimately didn't work. And then that ties into the final point, which we really could have pressed them on, which is actually breaking into new international markets, because they tried it in Europe and then they had the recall and it didn't work. So we really could have focused on our existing ability and manufacturing capabilities in those countries to get them straight into new markets without potentially going down that JV route and taking longer to do so. And it would have been in their best interest to quickly break into a market.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
And well done, both of you.
Thank you.
So as we conclude with the final round, I request the audience to proceed with the validity ceremony as the judges vote. Now, I request you to clear outside for a while. I don't think.
I understood that something.
And
After this phone call, do they proceed to the
so I think it would be great if we could speak to them and we can give them a little bit of feedback. I don't mind doing that in front of both at the same time.
I'll let them. It's supposed to be. You have to wait outside till this